probe detected.
The advancement and diffusion of knowledge is the only true guardian of liberty.
As I set aside some time and I look back, I feel it's so easy to forget in the sea of video game franchises that have come and gone over the years. The MechWarrior series is one that stood shoulder to shoulder with some of the greats. It was a set of releases that is well known for popularizing the combat simulation genre, to then end up only fading from gamers' crosshairs and eventually completely from their line of sight. I can't help but wonder if the next generation of gamers can really appreciate it in the same way we once did all those years ago, without the opportunity to even discover it.
That's a violation of the Ares Convention.
Who are these maniacs?
The crazy thing is, if you take a second and analyze the success of the MechWarrior games, it becomes abundantly apparent that they were more defined by the demographic and generation it was aimed at, rather than standing on the merit of each individual release. This is a challenge to the next generation and an appeal to my own. If you have ever played the MechWarrior series, or have thought about it over the years, now is the time to join the community, and I want to show you why. Each game tackled subtle problems in different creative ways across generations of hardware, culminating into a series whose gameplay elements and storytelling techniques made waves inside a growing industry, and they set standards that studios still struggle to hit decades later. Now, despite the dwindling fandom and where the series has landed after all these years, I think it could be fun to take a glimpse back at each individual release that would eventually coalesce into the MechWarrior franchise, starting with the Super Nintendo entry. Now look, I'm gonna level with you. This isn't going to be just about giant robots hurling lightning bolts and making pew pew noises at each other.
Sure, whatever.
Come on, who am I kidding? It's going to mostly be about hurling lightning bolts, but that's beside the point. It's also about the evolution of a series from a side project to promote a hobby, to a full video game franchise series that stands on its own outside the media that created it. The bottom line is, MechWarrior is a vehicle simulation game based on bipedal war machines that fight and stomp around the science fiction board game franchise, Battletech. You see, Battletech started in 1984 with a single board game known as Battle Droids. The space wizards over at LucasArts sent a cease and desist over the use of the term droid for some reason, which is what prompted the name change.
You had to take the fun out of it, didn't you?
Let's go, schoolboy. Daylight's wasted.
This was your typical 80s board game with Giga Chad Chin warriors that sound like they gargle gravel in the mornings. It's got giant death machines marching in a futuristic landscape and politics that rival that of Game of Thrones. It's since grown over the past 40 years to include countless expansions to the board game, hundreds of novels, and tens of thousands of horny bearded basement dwellers. The wild thing is, in the end, we should all end up thanking LucasArts' questionable ethics for forcing the game to become Battletech. The rename would eventually produce the term Battle Mech, birthing the name MechWarrior.
Catchy slogans may win you points on a backwater planet like Somerset, but here at the Nagel Ring, we're a little more sophisticated.
The word you're looking for is outdated.
MechWarrior is arguably one of the only video game series to break away from the source material rather than lean on it, with over 100 million copies sold collectively over the past 3 decades. The game's success dwarfs that of the tabletop. Picking up a controller or sitting at your family PC was always such a more accessible way to approach the Battletech universe when compared to the other options. Here it comes. It's time to be blunt. The way I've always looked at it, Battletech has been a universe suffering from a kind of stolen valor syndrome. No matter when you have joined the community, it feels without prior knowledge of previous events or inside jokes. You always feel out of place or behind the curve. I'm constantly playing catch up and saying to myself, when the hell did that happen? And it's not from lack of trying to keep up. The video game series was always such a more digestible entry point for gamers, with its tiptoe approach to exposing the player to the larger universe. A steady stream of titles and releases has created its own community and still remains the most immersive way to dive in and experience this OG sci-fi setting. With the turbulent but ultimately successful PGI titles, and the questionable future the franchise has in this current gaming landscape of loot boxes, forgotten promises, and licensing clusterfucks, I would like to indulge myself and take you on an in-depth look into where the series started and how it grew into the juggernaut of a franchise that forever feels like it's teetering on the edge of being forgotten. This specific video will be covering the Super Nintendo entry, but eventually we'll be looking into all of the games and the gaming studios that took on this beloved series. I will spotlight some of the developers whose imaginations brought this universe to life. I want us to pay our respects to the musicians who set the tone for an entire universe. And I obviously want to cover the juicy mech combat in full detailed review, from weapon and mech comparisons to game-breaking bugs. How did these things evolve over the years? What studio's interpretation stuck? What decisions came from the publishers? Or were all these gaming studios just handed a giant Bible of Battletech and told to get to work? This isn't just a review or a basic retrospective. We will be doing straight up digital necromancy on every game, starting at the very beginning and then working our way forward in time, video by video. The overall story and setting of Battletech is complex and spans hundreds of years worth of nerdy shit to dive headfirst into. There are already a ton of videos covering the lore in extreme detail, so I don't feel the need to go deeper into Battletech's mythos and history for context. The absolute beauty of MechWarrior is you can engage with the greater universe in any way you want. You could read the book series, you can watch official media, you can view hundreds of creators that cover the overall universe and explain it in eye-watering and excruciating detail. You could even join the minority of fans and play the tabletop it's all based on.
Cross-training is the key to victory, specialization is the way to defeat.
The amazing part of this series is you don't actually need to engage with any of the narratives that run alongside these titles. It's all optional with very little detail held back to push you into the mainline content. The only drive is your own curiosity and thirst for knowledge rather than a necessity created to drive sales and inflate stock prices. It's kind of weird, but the games stand as their own set of events and stories outside the Battletech universe's strict rules and mythology. MechWarrior is about mechs and the combat they thrive in. It glances and hints at the reasons on why the combat is taking place, but it is a series in which its narrative experience stands alone, parallel to the history and lore it exists in. I could even argue the stories and events from the games are some of the community's favorites, and it's a fact that millions of people have been introduced to the tabletop and Battletech universe as a whole because of this collection of video games and how much better it handles the source material compared to its progenitors.
Okay, give me your ears. This mission is a surgical strike, not a chainsaw massacre. Get me? Stick to their power sources for now. Mop-up comes later.
Sure. Focus on the primary targets. No problem.
We heard the briefing, Scourge. Just let us do our jobs.
Fair enough, but be advised, I will tear you a new one if you bullocks this mission. That's all.
Jeez, I get a little rowdy on leave and wind up with the Lance Leader from hell.
Zip it, Trey. You ain't even close to hell yet. Don't make me rush your trip.
Putting aside my own long history with this license and being unbiased in this set of retrospectives is going to be impossible. So I want to start with my personal story about the original MechWarrior we are covering. Sharing this with you should be relevant, so bear with me. Don't worry, I won't be doing this every video. I just want to set some context. Hopefully this will give you an insight into why I'm tackling such a large video project with no prior experience. If you haven't figured it out already, I'm not really a content creator. I'm obviously not a voice actor. I'm just like many of you. I just have a passion, some spare time on my hands, and a story to share.
By your request.
I requested no such thing. Who are you?
I first played MechWarrior in 1995 when I was only 7 years old. I was a little too young to experience the original PC release, so I was still completely oblivious to anything Battletech. My mother would take me to the store every single Saturday to rent a game, and I was obsessed from the moment I saw the cover art. After years of renting it over and over again, it got to the point the clerk would let me know it wasn't even there the moment I walked into the rental store. I never found the cartridge for sale in any local retailers, so I just continued to happily rent it weekly. 4 years later, the local rental store was selling their SNES cartridges. At 11 years old, I had the net worth of exactly fuck all since I'd been spending my pocket money on renting the game every week for almost half my life. So I went to my last resort. I asked my grandmother for a loan and promised her I'd pay her back the next week. You see, I grew up in a typical multi-generational household. My grandmother helped raise me and was always forever the enabler. She promptly loaned me the money and I ran off to purchase the game with what could only be described as a Cheshire smile on my face. Finally guys, I could play this game during the week after school. Maybe now I could finally finish it. It's hard to explain, but it was an overnight rental for the longest time. I know the old guys watching can relate to this, but the battery save was always cleared by the time I could rent it again. I was so caught up in my own shit, it wasn't until later that day I found out my grandmother was going into the hospital for a routine procedure. It was honestly starting to become a pretty common occurrence at that time. Look, I'll skip over the details of the story, but later that week my grandmother passed away from complications during her surgery. My last pathetic interaction with her was just blatantly hitting her up for cash, and for some reason it messed with me for years. Moving the story along, one day in my mid-30s I took a trip to a grave and I returned that $10 with interest. While having lunch later with the missus, we discussed ways I could put the guilt behind me. This is where the story comes together, so hang in there. I had been watching speedruns online and suggested getting the speedrun world record for the game. She thought it was a great idea. I have no idea why I suggested this, to be honest. I just figured it would be a fun way to get some closure. I honestly don't think I ever intended to follow through with my promise. It was no more than that rhetoric shit to make me feel better. But even as a grown-ass man, I couldn't let it go. I had to finish what I started all those years ago. I don't think a soul on this earth thought it would spark a love for speedrunning and push my zeal for the MechWarrior games even further. It was all meant to be my final goodbye to the series, but somehow ended up being the reignition of a torch I still carry to this day. While I have to admit, sometimes my activity is lacking, I've been involved with the MechWarrior community in some capacity for the past 25 years. I have played every title from pretty much their release. The competitive teams I've been a part of have even seen some levels of success. Well, I guess that depends on who you ask. But regardless of my own performance, it is an undeniable fact I have trained countless pilots in the art of making scrap metal, and I have thousands of hours in each individual game.
4th Sky Rangers War of 39. 27 missions, 4 field commendations.
Very impressive, Captain Hawkins. You've got the job.
It's very safe to say that someone like me should be burned out on the series, but the big stompy brings me back every single time. I cannot understate how much passion the original title ignited towards this series and the entire Battletech universe. I want to share my experience being strapped into a prone to overheating walk-in reactor with you. This game collection has so much to offer everyone, and it's slowly getting forgotten to time. I want to do something about it. It is so obvious I have my criticisms of this series like any fan, but I want to fight the urge to become an old man yelling at clouds for a little while longer and put all that aside by looking back at where this humble sequence of titles started. MechWarrior was originally developed by Dynamix for DOS and published by Activision. Dynamix took on the Herculean task of converting a complicated board game into a living, breathing virtual universe. The gameplay loop consisted of traveling to different planets and representing one of the great houses in combat missions. It had much more freedom in some ways than its successors due to the full map of the inner sphere, something that would not return to the series until MechWarrior 5 over 30 years later. Battle mechs can be bought, sold, or repaired. That's it. You could not modify the mechs in the original title. We will come back to this.
How did you...
I'll show you later, if you ask nicely.
The best the player could do is act as a merchant and acquire mechs on one planet and sell them on another planet. MechWarrior on DOS was the first Battletech game that placed the user within an actual battle mech to pilot in first person. The mech lineup is full of a much more familiar roster than the Super Nintendo title we are covering today. The roster consisted of mechs like the Locust, the Phoenix Hawk and Marauder, and even more of your family's favorites. MechWarrior on DOS was a commercial success. It received no lower than scores of 4 out of 5 from critics, and even collected a couple of 5 out of 5s. Dynamix would lose the license to make Battletech products, but would go on making games until the mid-2000s when they were shut down by a restructuring at Sierra. A story you and I will become all too familiar with by the end of this series. Trust me. If you would like to know more about the original DOS game, there is a very underappreciated video linked in the description by the channel Retro Reload that explores the first attempt at the MechWarrior formula. I'm not going to go over it any more detail because quite frankly, getting this game to run is a bitch. And to me, it was always just missing something that just wasn't quite there. Moving forward to 1992, the game would be upgraded and ported to Super Nintendo, and Activision was looking for a studio to take on the complicated task of getting the game to home consoles. Now, I'm not here to conduct an entire history lesson, but Nintendo development was expected to be around 9 months at the time. And the entire game had to be rebuilt from the ground up to work on console. Technology workarounds needed to be invented to even get the project off the ground. When all was said and done, the studio that stepped up to take on this major technical task was a legend in Australia, but relatively unknown internationally, Beam Software. They had somewhat made waves in the industry for developing such classics like the 1982 text adventure The Hobbit, and the genre-defining martial arts game The Way of the Exploding Fist, as well as several titles from the first and second generation of consoles, but the reality is their renown was by no means international yet. You see, it was back in 1987 that Nintendo granted Beam a developer's license for their consoles. The company was approached after purchasing the console and reverse engineering a developer suite. It's worth mentioning because this was completely under their own initiative. The partnership with Nintendo would be very successful with games developed like Star Wars, Back to the Future, and Smash TV. Beam also tried to focus on Australian titles such as Aussie Rules Footy and International Cricket. The pedigree this studio has is actually insane. For a studio that was only 10 years old at the time, their catalogue reached so far across the world.
There's 3 ways that really we could come to an agreement with a third party to develop a game. They could have a license or a game idea and they come to us and say, we want you to develop this game, okay? Now, that happened with heaps and heaps of games, including Lucasfilms wanted to do us to do Star Wars for them on the NES and so on. But why do companies in America come to Australia to develop these games? And there's a lot of resistance to developing in Australia because you're so far away, right? So we developed a reputation that we were very, very responsive, very fast, so that anything that they asked us would get answered that day. Even if we don't have an answer yet, they would get a reply that day. So in many cases, it felt like it was instantaneous because they would ask us at the end of their day. We would work on it all our day, give them an answer. They wake up in the morning, there's the answer, right? So the time advantage, we tried to turn that, time difference, we tried to turn that into an advantage. But so they would tend to give us the projects which were tight deadlines or needed technology that they couldn't afford to do with. Because ideally, if you're a publisher, you want to be able to sort of look over the shoulder of the guy who's working at it and see what's happening and so on. We're on the other side of the world. They're giving us the tough stuff.
There is no way to avoid mentioning it if we go any further. So let's get it out of the way now. Beam were releasing Shadowrun in the same month as MechWarrior. Can you believe that shit? Showing they were not only laying the groundwork for one series, but they were starting 2 legacies in the same year. Shadowrun had an incredibly rocky development to say the least, and being developed side by side with MechWarrior, we can take a look into that team to get a small idea of what the environment was like at Beam in the early 90s.
One artist plastered his area with nude girly pinups, modifying them so the girls were flayed open like autopsy cadavers. That sure made certain management kept the hell away. My own solution was simpler. Back yourself into a corner, with ramparts of broken equipment piled around you like barricades. We surgically modified Barbie dolls into hellish hypodermic centaurs and placed them on guard over the cubicles. The head of the company hired a film team to make a promotional video. The musicians swiped a copy and then cut it as a rap song, spliced with shots from the Nuremberg rally, the Hindenburg crashing, and parades in Red Square, then slipped it onto the boss's computer as his startup message for the next day.
Kid managed to wade through the madhouse that was Beam Software. and managed to produce what has gone on to become a cult classic. While the MechWarrior team and the game's development itself is not as well documented as Shadowrun's, they did share an artist and a composer, showing the teams were connected at some point during the development. I'm telling you guys, I've exhausted every link, citation, written and recorded interview. I even went as far as reaching out to museums and emailing the developers themselves for research on this entry to the series. Information on the MechWarrior team has been harder to come by than a Red Bull at a speedrunning event. From what I can tell, the team did enjoy Beam's hallmark 90s rebel environment and did not see as much resistance as the Shadowrun team. MechWarrior's port to Super Nintendo was directed by Alfred Milgram, the founder and CEO of Beam Software. It's one of the only titles he has a director/designer credit for in his long career, indicating just how involved he was in this project. It's honestly hard to tell if all the talent in the studio was assigned to Shadowrun, or a passion for the IP that put him in the position, but the amount of experience he brought to the table couldn't have hurt the situation. At some point or another, Alfred had been involved in producing dozens of games over the years, and is considered an Australian video game industry icon, being the founder of one of Australia's first video game studios, and paved the way for an entire generation of artists and developers.
You've got to understand the sort of atmosphere that we had is that it wasn't as formalized as the sort of Google where 20% of your time you can do whatever you want, but we encouraged people to come up with interesting things all the time. And it wasn't, okay, they still had to do their job and we still were sort of pushing them to that, but we always wanted to have more from them and encouraging people to bring out their best. And it wasn't just me, but a whole culture developed where everybody is pushing everybody else to do better, you know, so that if a graphic artist does something, the programmers look at it and they say, you can do better than that, and then the designer says to the programmer, you can do better than this. Everyone's pushing each other to do better all the time.
Pioneering programming in the Mode 7 workaround of the first-person view, and internal systems was handled by Andrew Davies' team. Andrew was a veteran of Beam and a near mythical figure in his field. He left the company for Sega only a year after MechWarrior's release, to then only end up stepping away from the game industry altogether in 2000, so he could pursue his doctorate. Andrew went on to contribute greatly to the Australian scientific community, programming underwater service vehicles for CSIRO. Andrew has done a couple of interviews over the years, and going through them, comparing his comments with Paulie Kidd, Beam had a certain, let's call it, culture? It's hard to know whether or not this culture was the thing that led to their success or ultimate demise, but just looking at some stories, it's hard to not appreciate and sit back in awe learning about the environment these old games were created in.
One artist liked to put naked women in the background graphics. Frank was his name. We found out about one of them by reading a kid's letter to one of the magazines. He claimed that in the woods of one Spectrum game, there was a naked lady lying down. Sure enough, there she was. Nobody had noticed before, and I recall Fred just smiling when he found out. Then there was T. T was not happy. He was given a larger cartridge allocation from 8K to 16K on an NES game toward the end of his project, so he filled the space with cartoons, caricatures of people in the company. I'm told the first picture was captioned, "This is T. He is not happy." And then it went on to mock just about everyone. Never did see the one about me. I still like T, so perhaps it's best that I don't ever see it. I do know that some of it was pretty callous and vicious, but as he said, T was not happy.
Clearly, Beam had a fun-loving and free-spirited approach to management that was starting to be pressured by the growing gaming industry. From most of the members' perspectives, the people they worked with made it all worth it, and they were proud to be the pioneers in a country very much isolated from the rest of the world back in the 90s. It's crazy to think the stereotypical madness and chaos of game development in the 90s actually existed. We have all heard stories or seen interviews about what developing games in the early days was all about, but the more I look into it, the more I'm absolutely inspired and completely blown away.
There's also, back we had little game teams of two, and another team of two was Andrew Davey and David Pentecost, and these two guys are both Tasmanian, so it's a Tassie joke coming up here, but one morning, I think it was Andrew Davey coming really excitedly into work and said, Dave, I've looked into our family tree and you and I are related. You know, they've got the same great-great-great-grandfather. Nigel just nonchalantly turns around the corner and looks at them and says, all Tasmanians are related. And it was just one of those moments in Beam history where the entire company just erupted and cracked up laughing. When you look at it back now, there's not much of a joke there, but it was funny at the time. Bill and I, we used to argue about the most ridiculous things when, like, we would both come in early. I would come in early because I had a regular train to catch. I was, training my train at that time, so I always got in at a certain time. First half hour of every morning, Bill and I would just argue about ridiculous things, all very geeky things. He was working on the Sinclair Spectrum, which had a Z80 processor in it. I was working on the Commodore 64 that had a 6510 or whatever it was. And we would argue about which processor was the best and why. That's rubbish instruction and this one's better. Or the other favourite argument amongst all the programmers at the time was which editor did you use? All the editor did was something that you typed in the code into. And we would argue about, Bill would use one thing and I'd be using another one and say, that's rubbish, you need to be using this. And we would argue, spend half a day arguing, or half an hour arguing every day. And this is back to this lack of professionalism that the company had at the time. And it's only when everyone started flooding into the company that was sort of, we better get back to work. Semi-bad things are still funny to talk about. I remember Rod Richards busting a watermelon open on one of our producer's keyboards and leaving all this watermelon sitting in the keyboard for a whole weekend. Brewing away, disgusting it was. And I don't know why he did it, but we were just throwing watermelons around the place, Just the things that you do when you're at work,
The final spotlight we have is on Marshall Parker, who did a fucking fantastic job doing the music and sound design. The first game Marshall worked on was a little known NES title, Star Wars. You may have heard of it. He would continue to compose music for all of Beam's NES and later console launches, until Marshall took on a senior role at Ubisoft, leaving Beam to contribute heavily to the Assassin's Creed series. After retirement, he later reappeared to compose music for Shadowrun Returns, which featured some remixes of his original SNES music. His style penetrated Beam software work for well over 10 years. The tracks Marshall produced are part of some of the most shit-hot soundtracks in early Nintendo and PC gaming. Beam's ambition and goal always dwarfed the size of the actual company. Beam were dreamers and pushed every project they took on to its absolute limit while constantly being pressured from distributors and publishers. They went on to relaunch their Melbourne House brand in the year 2000 to start publishing games in Australia again. One last good old-fashioned stab at it. They developed and published 3 games under this name, and these would be considered their true final legacy, the strategy game series Crush, Kill and Destroy. Beam did continue to make games until Chrome Studios acquired Melbourne House from Atari in 2006. It was renamed Chrome Studios Melbourne and mostly produced ports for the PlayStation 2 and Xbox 360 until it was closed in 2010. All in all, a very unfitting end for such a heavy hitter in the days of early development. Now I understand I'm gushing hard over Beam software and their legacy, but as we progress in the video series, you will start to understand the type of devastation developing a MechWarrior title has on the future of these studios we are covering. It wouldn't be until the 2010s we would see another survivor of a MechWarrior release. But as we go along, you will all see that for yourself. Too many studios have been taken out the back of the shed and been shot by the publishers they made rich with releases like MechWarrior and its successors. Beam Studio is just another to be sucked dry of talent, buried and forgotten. It's completely fucked.
Attention, scientists, tech, and labor castes of Somerset. You are now Isorla, the rightful property of Clan Jade Falcon.
The game was translated and published by Victor Software in Japan. This decision to port and sell the game over there is the financial motivation behind the game existing. It's also the reason there are new mech designs instead of just using the ones available in the DOS port. The entire game would be adjusted from its DOS parent to be more appealing to the Gundam and Macross fans. This created a bit of an issue since Battletech actually licensed its designs from one of those series to begin with. It sounds familiar since it would only become a precursor to a famous giant bitter lawsuit that consumed consumed this franchise for decades, locking some of our most beloved death machines behind an unseen wall. The want and need to appeal to the Japanese market ended up forcing an alignment more closely with our mecha brothers. And this is ultimately what caused many of the changes in the series that stuck. Most of all, drumroll please, the ability to fully customize your mech was brought in. This ability to change weapons, parts, engines, and armor freely has become a defining factor in the series, and was the thing missing from the original interpretations. It's hard to know if they understood the implications this would have on the series moving forward. This was a total game changer to the gameplay loop offered by the original games. This was the key to truly enjoying the MechWarrior formula. Adapting this key ability from the tabletop to digital entertainment was a pinnacle building block in the growth of the franchise, and can be considered the point that MechWarrior truly stumbled on the game mechanic that defines it. Whether you're a new player discovering this series or a veteran of the tabletop, this one feature drew you back time and time again, making a mech your own, trying out new weapons, and coming up with something that is unique to your playstyle is all part of the base MechWarrior experience. There were 8 new mech designs introduced in total. 4 variants of a mech called the Nexus, the Raijin, the Fujin, the Grand Crusader, and finally the Ragnarok. Weirdly, all these mechs would later be resurrected for new storylines and designs for the novels in 2022, taking almost 30 years to be dug out of the backlog of mechs in this setting. From what I can tell, there is only one difference between the North American and Japanese mech designs, and it's hinted at in the English manual, leading to wide-led speculation you could acquire this 4-legged mech variant in the North American version, even though it specifically says you can't. I have to take a little time and mention the Japanese box art. While hitting way harder than it deserves to, it's clearly much more in reference to the Macross and Gundam roots the game has inside of Japan, and will be one of the last time art styles cross over. The advertising and artwork used to promote the game in North America left very little to the imagination. The menacing presence of the battle mech was all they needed to get my attention. On the other hand, magazine advertisements were rare and coverage of the game was limited to a couple of reviews and a small spotlight in Nintendo Power, so maybe they knew the cover art was enough. I mean, seeing this thing out in the wild was rare. I think the only piece of media I ever came across back in the day was the cheesy 90s commercial that played during Saturday morning cartoons.
MechWarrior. 60 tons of power under my seat. MechWarrior's not for people who can't stand the heat. Virtual reality, aim and shoot with my 3D cockpit simulation view. Jump jets, laser beams, cannons, full bore, heat-seeking missiles and shields on board. Combat, got attack, go for the thrills, get the cash, paying back. Yo, you got the skills. Plan ahead, use your head, think and be wise. Your thumb's not alone, you gotta strategize. Visuals, colors, popping sound in the brain. You live MechWarrior, it's a mean fighting game. MechWarrior.
Before we get sidetracked any further, it's probably time to get to the review part and actually talk about the game and the gameplay. After the short and sweet introduction, you are dumped onto the main menu like any other Super Nintendo game at the time. This menu screen is actually the only part of the game that I can't stand. The use of the in-game mech rather than the box art mech was a bold choice, and one that ages the menu. Even as a kid, I knew something wasn't quite right. It honestly looks a little unrendered. Press start game to find out you're in control of Harris, a mercenary who has been training for 10 long years, refining his MechWarrior skills in order for him to be able to get his revenge on the people who murdered his family. Clearly the kid wasn't in any rush and ended up doing a long training arc we didn't get to see.
I'm the only one left. My only chance is to take out the leader.
Negative, Kylie. Pull back to 120 meters and engage with your autocannon.
Throughout the game, Harris finds clues on the whereabouts of his family's killers, and he goes after all of them one at a time with hopes of finally unaliving the Darkwing Lance and getting that sweet revenge. The writing is pretty good, especially for a Super Nintendo game. You can tell Beam was really trying to put the narrative in the spotlight with this title. 30 years later, many of the story's elements like Club 00 or characters like Carl here would be further canonized. You are casually greeted with 4 simple icons at the game's opening hub, and the menu's icons are clear and easy to understand. Everything outside of the Mech Lab is communicated with clear visuals, so it makes navigation a breeze for anyone. Once you boil it down, the gameplay loop consists of investigation, selection, preparation, and execution. A classic style of design, with a clear inspiration from the first DOS game. It takes into account the limitations of the Super Nintendo by removing the full Innisphere star map for a simplified approach of 3 to 4 procedurally generated side missions with a hidden handcrafted story. The The story missions are triggered once you talk to the correct person at the bar at Club 00, flexing a linear version of the dialogue trees Beam was known for at this time, and showing just a little bit more of that influence shine through. Mission types, planet biomes, outside temperature, and expected opposition are all randomized to a degree, but combat can become stale after a couple of hours. Being a Super Nintendo title, it is expected that it is designed to be played in short bursts rather than long sittings, as to appeal to the riddle-and-filled generation we were. There could be considered endless replayability for its time, and after finishing the story once, there is no need in future playthroughs. Much like the original DOS game, the SNES port has the bare-bone experience that would later define the much-beloved Mercenary sets of games. The mission types you can encounter consists of things like destroy all enemies, recover an item, defend and attack a base. There are also 3 very similar boss fights to encounter along your career, but you can only encounter them when you're following the storyline. While these 4 mission types are enough to keep the first few hours fresh and exciting, the game has a tendency to feel like you're beating your head against a wall and making no progress at all. Investigation consists of looking for keywords of planets and people in my favorite place, Club 00, called that because it's located on the equator line on Galatea, a planet that is barely recognized in the lore. There is a little newsfeed in the corner that changes when you advance the story. It's connected to a timeline that follows some of the books, but diverges later into its own sets of events since none of the lore had been completely pinned down yet. Negotiations for contracts gives you a real sense of being a mercenary and is executed pretty well. While this is the smallest part of the gameplay and the only actual effect it has is the size of your payout, having that freedom to choose your missions on a selection of planets gives you a sense of a much larger universe that you're actually exposed to. You're able to ask for a greater reward depending on the risk you're taking, but be careful. If you push them too far and ask for too much, they can pull the contract and drastically reduce the amount of rewards available. Unlike in the DOS entry, there is no choice for what house to represent in mission selection. You'll be picking up contracts exclusively from Mr. Hans and House Davian, and the occasional contract of opportunity presented from some very suspicious patrons at Club 0. Now then, preparation is where the majority of a playthrough's contrast is created. Weapon loadouts, mech speeds, and available cooling can be deciding factors in some mission objectives, and all can be changed at the chop shop.
Captain Hawkins, Lieutenant Ramirez, report to Mech Bay on the double.
Mech Bay? Is he nuts?
The market is RNG based with the very best mechs available at the start of the game. Much like it would be in real life, your ass is just way too broke to afford them. Onto the last part of the gameplay loop, execution. That is the realm of combat. Unfortunately, this is where most critics say the game falls flat. They always end up mentioning something like, it's a neat touch the way your mech has a detailed cockpit interior complete with radar for tracking enemies, but, and then they slam the game for its lack of content when comparing it to modern titles hundreds of times larger size. My perspective is a little different. What essentially happens is that you drop down on a planet, locate an enemy mech, and start exchanging fire until one of you is liquefied to the point they need a hose to remove you from the cockpit. There's really not a lot to do other than getting into firing range and letting your weapon cycle as fast as possible. But this is the actual beauty of the combat. Managing ranges, heat, and damage was already overwhelming for the average gamer. Adding any extra complexity would have just gated off access to the very generation they were trying to tap into. Long-range weapons can be a way around the monotony. There is even a manual aim that can be utilized to hit shots at longer ranges, aiming for components. Unfortunately, the shoulder buttons don't actually rotate your torso like you would think, making aiming and moving impossible. Rotating the mech's torso individually to the legs would not become a feature until the next title. This inability to aim and move does slow the combat down, but this is to your benefit if you ask me. The combat can end up feeling very turn-based, and that is actually a cool little hat tip to the tabletop. I know this wasn't intended, but sometimes you can luck into some pretty convenient coincidences. You can blow up a mech's leg to immobilize it, but with the time it takes, you could easily just aim for the cockpit instead. A crippled mech cannot move, but it can still fire at you. You can take off a mech's arm and it does reduced damage, but there's no point in doing this because again, you can just aim for the cockpit. Jump jets continuously build heat and are designed to lift you up on a way out of the enemy fire. This can be abused later on. There are two primary strategies in combat when things get tough. The first one is just to get the toughest mech you can afford, put on as much armor as you can, and equip a boatload of missiles and hope to God you don't run out of ammo. From there, you basically just get into everybody's face and blow them away in a war of attrition. The second and my favorite approach is to equip nothing but long-range lasers or PPC weaponry. I simply spend my time backing away from the enemy while I snipe them from a safe range. I used to call it reverse ski. This route is technically less risky in areas like boss battles, but you can't do it in defense missions. I usually have a short range and a long range mech available in playthroughs to utilize both tactics. In the end, it doesn't take you long before you notice there can only be 3 enemies on the screen at once. This is due to engine limitations which can become easy to predict and manipulate. Those random missions where 3 enemy mechs spawn straight on top of you as you come in from orbit are usually the only butt-puckering moments the game can throw at you. Standing still can increase your fire rate as moving adds to that patented Nintendo slowdown, while another little neat trick is you can press L and R at the same time to eject, avoiding the extra cost of a destroyed mech after you run out of ammo. This unfortunately uses up that one and only retry they give you. Apparently this dude only has 1 ejection seat or some shit, I don't know. The mech selection by modern comparison is small, but considering it was 1993 and you were lucky if a game had a character selection at all, having the ability to play between 8 mechs is something that I always viewed as an enormous roster at the time. The Nexus is the starting mech, and there are 4 variants available, each offering different visual appearances over the other. The addition of arms does not really give you any advantage, and the thicker legs do nothing, since you have to face the enemy head on to return fire anyways. The Nexus is pretty much the same as the Nexus C, being just as capable of 40 tons, and a top speed of 190 km per hour when using little to no weaponry. Equipping one of these little guys with 2 PPCs allows you to back away from an enemy faster than they can move forward, and firing at the enemy taking almost no return damage. The Fujin and the Raijin designs are essentially the same mech other than in name and the fact that one didn't skip leg day. Their tonnage comes out at 55 tons each and are very capable of carrying a pilot to the end game, but just lack the ammunition capacity to finish the final boss. That being said, in most playthroughs these chassis get jumped over straight to the Crusader since C-bills are so easy to come by mid-game. The Grand Crusader is mentioned to be just a variant of the original Crusader, although the actual history of this mech can be confusing and way more complicated than it has any right to be. Coming in at 80 tons, it's one of the 2 mechs capable of actually equipping enough armor and ammunition to go toe-to-toe with the final boss. This mech is the big daddy of the speedrun, coming in much cheaper than the Ragnarok. The only downside is with all the goodies it tends to lack armor and cooling, but if you delete your enemies quick enough it doesn't really become an issue. The Ragnarok. The final destruction of the world in a conflict between the Norse gods and the powers led by Loki. That's straight from the manual. This mech can equip everything with tonnage to spare. With 100 tons available, it's obviously capable of finishing off the entire Darkwing Lance and have ammunition to spare. A distant sprite still shows it having 4 legs even in the North American version, although I think this is just an oversight. It's the reason it led to the reference in the North American manual. Notably, you can't get access to the Ragnarok until late game due to the price, but it's sitting in the store waiting for you the whole time, staring at you with its murderous intent from the very start of the game.
It's like the Major always says.
Information is ammunition.
Next time, look before you leap.
Each mech is given 6 weapon hardpoints, and all mechs in the North American version can equip jump jets. Unfortunately, the Ragnarok in the Japanese version is groundbound. This balances the game quite well, but does strip away any identity the mechs are given from the further individual loadouts. Since homing missiles become a must take on anything that's stuck to the ground or slower than 150 km per hour, the weapon selection is surprisingly modern. All of the weapons that you know and love from the current games are present outside of one. A modern day player going back and playing the title would easily recognize all of the weapon systems. I'm always surprised by how well the tabletop mechanics translate into completely different medium. While these weapon systems are not exactly one-to-one of what we see in today's titles, going through them we can see the similarities they hold with the current iterations. Jump jets are self-explanatory. They lift your mech into the air and have a flat ratio of tonnage to speed over the entire mech catalog. Equipping any mech with more than 14 jump jets can break the game, allowing you to use a technique that would later be coined by the community, pop-tarting, jumping up and away from the enemy before they can even engage. Heat sinks don't work in the air, so you'll continue to build heat while they're activated. This is to encourage short jumps. Achieving an air or land speed of 151 kph will ensure no enemy can catch you. This is much easier to hit with jump jets when it comes to the heavier mechs. I find the Nexus is the only thing that can hit that speed on land. The jump-in technique allows you to equip a Ragnarok with 6 particle cannons and 0 heat sinks, allowing for plenty of armor and clearing the final boss with ease. When it comes to the missile systems, I'm not going to cover them individually. They're all pretty self-explanatory, but just in case you're a smooth brain, we can run through it. Short-range missiles, or SRMs, have a short range. Small amount of damage, but a high ammo capacity. Long-range missiles, or LRMs, are the opposite, with long ranges and large damage. Medium-range missiles sit in the middle. They all have homing equivalents that weigh more, and they are essentially a must-take in this game due to the pseudo 3D combat that can cause the enemies to get stuck above you, out of your reach. Machine guns are the lightest weapon in the game and generate no heat at all. They have mountains of ammunition and actually do decent amounts of damage. Their only downside being the fact that their range is so short that you can actually see the enemy's tattoos. I can only appreciate the fact that boating MGs has had the same Achilles heel since their inception. The laser range in the game follow the same philosophy as the missile weapon systems outside of generating a lot more heat and not requiring ammunition. The small lasers are useless outside of the first 8 or 9 missions, but taking 4 to 6 medium lasers with some heat sinks can easily clear missions up until the late game. Large lasers can be useful, but their heat generation puts them in the same boat as PPCs without the range benefit, and their increased rate of fire makes heat overwhelming very quickly. Particle cannons have always been the GOAT of MechWarrior games. It's the big gun you want to use. It shoots balls of lightning and creates slag out of mech armor instantly. Its damage capability and range make it king among all weapons, and taking more than 3 in this game generates no heat even when you have 0 heatsinks. This has been reported as a bug over the years, but I think it's intended. The only downside of this weapon is honestly the noise. It sounds like a fucking kangaroo dry reaching. Now alright, I'll admit, there are the missing autocannon systems. They would be reintroduced in the next title, and while this is only speculation, I can only assume they were not included due to technical limitations and time constraints. Moving on, weapon sounds are crisp, but when stacking several at the same time, they can saturate any of the other sounds that are trying to present themselves. It isn't until late game this becomes a problem when you have all 6 hardpoints filled. Thankfully, at the end of the day, it's as easy as changing loadouts and weapon systems to alleviate the problem. The music is the final piece of the puzzle that elevates the game further than anyone expected. While the list of tracks are small, they are all bangers. The intro and menu music is honestly somewhat standard for the time, but once the game begins, there are several tracks that stand above the rest. I have to start with the music of Club 00. The jazz set the sound for the entire Battletech universe for me. After playing this title, every Solaris lounge sounded like Zero in my head. Every time there was mention in a book of music, it was the sound of Club Zero. Anytime there was a bar scene, it was Club Zero. Club Zero's theme is never tiresome, and I can come back to it time and time again. 16-bit music has no right to hit this fucking hard. Marshall Parker kept to his namesake and really knocked it out of the park. The MechLab music is an eerie musical tone, and the long-held notes coupled with the sound of something or someone moving around, or the occasional spanner drop in here or there, it just adds to the ambiance. There are modern games that fail to set the mood of a scene, but this track manages to suspend my disbelief while I'm staring at a static picture. The negotiation music takes more from the Club 00 theme while adding a little bit of a sense of urgency. The subtle change when you're going from one area straight to the other helps ground the music and ties it all into the menu. These 3 tracks actually interact really well and seamlessly, and they almost come together to become one complete song. As we start to wrap it up here, I will point out, gameplay-wise, there were small changes here and there between the Japanese and North American release. One of the major differences being the difficulty of the game if you choose not to customize your mech. Rather than being given the A variant you are in the North American version, you're given a completely stock Nexus that's not capable of finishing the first mission.
Nice plan, you Major.
Your mech's overheating, pal. That strategy might work one-on-one, but you'd be a sitting duck in real combat.
You're right. Guess I'll just have to settle for real money.
This really pushes you to learn customization before you even start the game. There are also color differences here and there when it comes to the enemies, and it makes you wonder why they even bothered making these small changes to begin with. These small changes when comparing the North American and the Japanese releases always make me giggle to myself. Somebody actually put time and effort into these changes that have almost no impact. What executive consisted on brighter enemies? It's such a fucking weird request. The story is presented the same, give or take, other than the fact the sprites look like they cry in the shower so their enemies can't see their tears. It's jarring to say the least if you're coming from the other releases, but it actually has no effect on the gameplay. If you know the path through the game, there's no issue. The music in this version, while having its own appeal, has been completely changed, and when paired with the new character sprites, it gives the game a much more anime and upbeat feel when compared to the release we got. That one change in atmosphere makes the universe feel completely different, showing a true contrast between Battletech in Japan and the MechWarrior releases we had in North America. I enjoyed my playthrough of the Japanese version just as much as I do of any of my playthroughs of the North American release. Half the menus are still in English. It's honestly not hard to stumble through this one, even if you're an English speaker. Arguably, and hopefully after all that explanation, you would agree. It's hard to admit, but it's true. The MechWarrior Super Nintendo port was more important than the original MechWarrior DOS game. It was the introduction to Battletech for a lot of us younger fans at the time, and the first time the winning formula was used. The fact that the game was on Super Nintendo makes people think it's limited in its offering, but being proved, limitations breeds creativity. PC gaming compared to these days would be still considered in its infancy, and having a title on the premier console made it so much more accessible to the younger generation. If MechWarrior had never taken that jump, I honestly believe without the exposure of the formula the game created for the franchise, it never would have stood out as the premier title that it does these days. It set the tone, the gameplay mechanics, the sound design, the entire goddamn formula for every following game. The influence that slowly rippled through time can be seen through the people the game has left impressions on. I'm not alone. One of those people was Brian Young, the author of such Battletech novels as Honor's Gauntlet, A Quest for Survival, and The Voidbreaker.
As far as how I got into Battletech in the first place, actually, my first entry into the universe was the 1993 MechWarrior game on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. I played that game so much and loved it. I actually went through and played it again a couple of times right before I jumped into writing Honor's Gauntlet, and again afterward. It's just a lot of fun. And that's where the initial imagery that got me started on the Fox Patrol came from, my playstyle in that MechWarrior game.
The average critical reception was always marred by requests of the hardware that the Super Nintendo just could not deliver. The Mode 7 graphics, as revolutionary and clever as they were, only led to complaints that the game was not full 3D, something the hardware was never capable of to begin with. The over-ambition of the title set a shoot for the stars, aim for the moon approach, pushing the boundaries of what was capable with every entry that came after. This had a huge effect on the next title in the series. The complaints inside the reviews and the push for 3D in the industry catapulted the next mainline MechWarrior game into the spotlight, cementing it in the history books. I know you all know what title I'm talking about, but I promise you we will get there. We will get there. As we come to the end of the retrospective, it's easy to conclude I take this shit way too seriously and really need some sleep. I know you must think I'm crazy breaking down a Super Nintendo game which has less lines of code than I have words in this script. You can literally finish this game in a shorter time than it took you to watch this. But this isn't just a Super Nintendo game to me. It's the beginning of something very special and something that has been with me my entire life. This was Genesis. This was Alpha if I am Omega. I'm honestly jealous of people that can say that this was just another video game, because ignorance is bliss and it must be pretty fucking blissful to be soulless and care about nothing. Improving the graphics, simplifying the gameplay, enhancing the sound and music while allowing us greater customization was all accomplished in less than a year under some pretty taxing circumstances. It was revolutionary and established a complete genre that still exists to this day. The decision to focus on player-driven storytelling and allowing customization set the franchise on the road it continues down. Almost all modern MechWarriors can attest that 50% of the time spent in the games are spent in the mech lab crafting the perfect death machine while talking to your friends about the mech theory or events from the timeline. The base gameplay loop, as well as the tools used for storytelling, continued to be used in the franchise for years to come, and a player going back and experiencing this title even after playing the modern ones can see all the core aspects of the series even 30 years ago. At this point, there are probably more lessons to be learned here, but it's all ancient history, and I'm starting to feel like this is becoming more of a post-mortem than an actual retrospective.
There's an opportunity to be the best in the world. Let's set up our office overseas. We've got to compete with Electronic Arts, who started up later than we did, and also started as a cooperative of programmers and artists. But we wanted to live in Australia because this is our home and this is what we love and so on. So I could have created an Australian lifestyle for perhaps more success, but I wouldn't change it if I had it over again.
I'm gonna go off script for this part here. This project has ballooned to something that I never could have dreamed of. Thank you everybody from the bottom of my heart for watching this all the way to the end, and a huge thank you to anybody who pushed me to finish this. If you would like to support us and the channel moving forward, all you have to do is subscribe and comment. That's it. That's all I could ask for. As a new channel, it's the biggest way to support and encourage us to continue to make this type of content. If you want to join me and the rest of the Mech Academy community, you can find us at Discord. We do monthly giveaways, weekly MechWarrior events, as well as just hang out and have a good time with the good old-fashioned stompy stompy. If you like anything to do with MechWarrior, competitive MechWarrior, mech speedrunning, or you just want to argue about the size an SRM would be in real life, it's a great place to meet other pilots and get involved with the mech community. Until next time, MechWarriors, keep it tight and remember, whoever said never shoot a man in the back never saw the front of a hunchback.